So, you need to learn about ancient Egypt in 10 minutes for school or something. Here's everything you need to know about ancient Egypt in 10 minutes, plus some nice cheat sheets for you at the end. If you like, you can like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more content. The land of Egypt is located here in Northeast Africa on the Mediterranean Sea, near Asia and the Middle East. Egypt developed along the Nile River, which flooded every year and brought rich, fertile soil up from the water and allowed farmers to grow crops. The river is generally split between Upper and Lower Egypt, which gets confusing because Upper Egypt is actually to the south and Lower is to the north because the Egyptians made the Upper and Lower titles based around the Nile rather than the compass, and the Nile River flows south to north. Politically, early Egypt was split into various kingdoms, although there were many similarities including religion, art, and language. At around 3100 BC, a man known as Menes or Narmer unified Upper and Lower Egypt and started what is known today as Dynasty 0. Dynasties 1 to 3 began to more solidly shape Egyptian culture, especially around kingship and burial practice. The Egyptian Old Kingdom, which lasted from about 2625 BC to 2130 BC, was where Egypt really became a great advanced civilization on par with Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley. This is where we have dynasties 4 through 6, and of course hieroglyphics and the pyramids. To this day, no one really knows how some of these pyramids were built, but many alien-free theories abound, mainly focusing around ramps. Interestingly, there are no records of the creation of the pyramids. Pyramid development is well laid out in modern ruins, where we see the evolution from mastabas to step pyramids to bent pyramids to the massive true pyramids of Giza, the largest of which was the tallest building in the world until the 1800s. Pyramids, along with most Egyptian monuments, were the unification of two of the civilization's most important concepts: kingship and the afterlife. The Egyptian mythos housed many gods, including Horus, Isis, Osiris, and Anubis. I won't go into too much detail about Egyptian mythology here, largely because there isn't one true version of the mythology anywhere. There are many creation myths, many gods that change their realms, and many different customs to worship gods and prepare for the afterlife. A couple things, however, remain stunningly consistent throughout the entirety of Egyptian history, one of which is this concept of the afterlife. Egyptians recognized that one would be dead far longer than they would be alive, and as such placed preparation for the afterlife in highest regard. People would often be mummified to preserve their body, and riches would be buried with people to help them on their journey. The deceased would follow the sun as it set through the Duat, a sort of shadow realm separate from the real world, and would have to traverse a river, fighting off foes and demons as they went. They would then arrive at the House of Judgment, where their heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, or order. If their heart was heavier, it would be consumed and they would be damned for eternity. If it was lighter than the feather, the deceased could live in the afterlife. Of course, pharaohs, the kings of Egypt, would be buried with the most stuff possible and would generally have grand monuments to commemorate them, making sure that their memory, unlike their body, would be immortalized. The Old Kingdom would not last, however, and after 500 years, Egypt entered what is now called the First Intermediate Period for about a century. Multiple dynasties would be ruling at the same time in different capitals. Eventually, however, the pharaohs of Dynasty 11 reunified the state, and here we see some of the subtle evolutions that took place throughout Egyptian history. First, the concept of kingship and divine rule was strengthened as a backlash to the political fragmentation and instability of the intermediate period. The concept of kingship was closely tied to the concept of Ma'at, or order, which was meant to keep harmony in the world and keep the world going. Second, we begin to see burial rites become more egalitarian, with more and more types of people being able to be accepted into the afterlife instead of just the political and priestly elites. Third, Egypt began to expand. Nubia is generally Egypt's stress ball throughout history, always getting invaded and looted. During the Middle Kingdom, Egyptian borders pushed south, and massive forts were built to increase military projection into the region. Once again, however, Egyptian society declined into the Second Intermediate Period. You will notice that all of these dynasties and periods have creative, historically accurate names. For another 100 years, Egyptian power and wealth declined with the 13th and 14th dynasties, before Egypt was actually taken over by the Hyksos. After 1,450 years, the Egyptians were no more. Psych! As it turns out, invading and controlling Egypt didn't actually kill Egypt. There was something about the soul of Egypt, its language, its culture, its ritual, that made it irresistible to all who invaded. Instead of making Egypt a subjugated province in a massive empire, the Hyksos actually assimilated into Egyptian culture, taking the title of pharaoh for themselves and observing Egyptian customs. But in the 1500s BC, the Hyksos were pushed out and replaced by, can you guess the name? That's right, the New Kingdom. Like the Middle Kingdom before it, the New Kingdom changed from its predecessors, namely in foreign policy, cultural democratization, and the centralization of political power. Vowing to never let invaders rule Egypt again, the civilization expanded, taking over Nubia in the south and moving into Libya to the west and the Levant in the east. New Kingdom Egypt was far more militaristic than its predecessors, and we even see new military technologies such as the chariot and the use of swords during this time. Everything was going well for a while, until a pharaoh named Akhenaten decided to totally change the entire Egyptian religious structure and convert the whole country to a monotheistic religion that only recognized the sun orb as divine. Turns out people didn't really like it, and during or right after the reign of King Tut, everything went back to normal. By this time, however, other powerful civilizations had developed in the region, and Egypt had some real competition. To the north lay the Greeks, who liked to trade and didn't really threaten Egypt for now. In what is modern-day Turkey, there was the Mitanni, and in Mesopotamia there were various empires that rose and fell every couple centuries, such as Babylon and Assyria, and Neo-Babylon and Neo-Assyria, and Middle Assyria. Again, Egypt lasted a really long time. Biblical Israel also rose and fell during the New Kingdom and was a buffer zone between Egypt and its Asian adversaries. By this time in Egyptian history, pyramid building had gone away. No one really knows why, but after the Old Kingdom, pyramid building went off a cliff. By the New Kingdom, the obelisk had become the signature of Egyptian monumentalism, carved out of massive blocks of rock. The infamous Sea Peoples attacked around this time as well, collapsing every Mediterranean society except Egypt, who successfully fought them off. After the New Kingdom, the Third Intermediate Period began in 1075 BC with the 21st dynasty. Once again, Egypt fell into decline, and once again outsiders took control. Egypt fell into civil war during the reign of the last of the Ramses, foreign holdings were lost, and soon after, Libyans from the west invaded. 3 decades later, the tables would turn on Egypt, and the Nubians would invade and conquer them. But like the Hyksos before them, these invaders integrated into Egyptian society, and rather than change Egypt, Egypt changed them. This period ended in yet another calamity in 664 BC, when the Neo-Assyrian Empire conquered Egypt and made it a vassal state. While the Assyrians didn't turn Egyptian themselves, they allowed Egypt to maintain its own political and cultural systems, ensuring Egyptian civilization would continue to live on. It is here that Egypt enters the late period, which would last over 300 more years. Egypt would eventually throw off its Assyrian rulers, however, only 140 years later, Persia would invade and conquer Egypt again. Like the Assyrians, Persia allowed Egypt to keep its own pharaoh and culture, so these invasions are generally not considered the end of Egypt. Egypt beat them off, but Persia would go on to conquer them again a little bit later. The end would come in 332 BC, when Alexander the Great took Egypt from Persia. Greek culture, unlike the Middle Eastern ones at the time, was quite invasive, and influences of Greek thought, art, and governance can be seen from this point on, which is generally why this date is considered the end of Egypt. After this point, Egypt would belong to the Ptolemaic Empire, a remnant of Alexander's conquest, before becoming a vassal and then conquered by Rome in the 1st century BC. This was around the time that Cleopatra lived. Egypt is not the first civilization, but it is certainly the longest lasting. Lasting almost 3,000 years, the amount of time that lapsed from the civilization's beginning to its end is mind-blowing. Cleopatra is closer in time to us than the creation of the pyramids. Egypt has lasted longer than all the major religions except for Hinduism, and by the time the historical events of the Bible are taking place with Solomon and the building of the temple, Egypt had already been around for 2,000 years. No civilization has ever come close to that length of time. So that's it for this video, guys. Here's some info on the screen if you want some of this information consolidated. Hope you enjoyed. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more content. And I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.